Welcome back to Footnotes Folly, and to Josephus's Antiquities. I am Pemberton. This is Book 2, Part 2. We left Joseph in a dungeon. We find him now standing before the throne of Egypt. Pharaoh has dreamed of 7 fat cattle and 7 lean, of 7 full ears of grain and 7 withered, and no wise man can read it until the forgotten Hebrew is brought up out of prison. Watch him rise in a single morning from slave to governor of all Egypt, lay up the harvests against a coming famine, and feed the world. And watch that famine drive 10 guilty brothers down to Egypt to buy bread, not knowing they kneel before the boy they sold. Here is one of the oldest and most moving scenes ever written, a brother weeping and forgiving. We will see the whole house of Israel come down into Egypt to settle in Goshen, and we will close 2 long lives, old Jacob and Joseph himself. Let us take up the story.
Joseph had now grown to 30 years of age and enjoyed great honors from the king, who called him Sothom-Phainich because of his extraordinary wisdom, for that name means the revealer of secrets. Joseph also married a wife of very high rank. She was the daughter of Potiphar's, one of the priests of Heliopolis. She was a virgin, and her name was Asenath. Before the scarcity came, he had children by her. The elder was Manasseh, whose name means forgetful, because his present happiness made him forget his former misfortunes. The younger was Ephraim, whose name means restored, because Joseph had been restored to the freedom of his forefathers. After Egypt had happily passed through 7 years, according to Joseph's interpretation of the dreams, the famine came upon them in the 8th year. Because this misfortune fell on them when they had not understood it beforehand, they were all severely afflicted by it, and came running to the king's gates. Pharaoh called upon Joseph, who sold corn to them, and became openly acknowledged as the savior of the whole multitude of the Egyptians. Joseph did not open this market of corn only to the people of that country. Strangers also had permission to buy, because Joseph wanted all men, who are naturally related to one another, to receive help from those who were living in prosperity. When Jacob learned that foreigners were allowed to come, he sent all his sons into Egypt to buy corn, for the land of Canaan was grievously afflicted by the famine, and this great misery touched the whole continent. He kept back only Benjamin, who had been born to him by Rachel, and had the same mother as Joseph. Jacob's sons came into Egypt and applied to Joseph, wanting to buy corn. Nothing of this kind was done without Joseph's approval, since even the honor paid to the king himself was useful to those who paid it only when they also took care to honor Joseph. Joseph recognized his brothers clearly, but they had no thought that it was he. Joseph had been only a youth when he left them, and now he had reached a much greater age, so that the features of his face had changed and they did not know him. Besides this, the greatness of the dignity in which he appeared did not allow them even to suspect that it was Joseph. He now tested what their feelings were about matters of the greatest importance. He refused to sell them corn, and said they had come as spies on the king's affairs. He said they had come from several countries, had joined themselves together, and were pretending to be relatives, since it was not possible that a private man could raise so many sons, and sons of such great beauty of face as they had, when raising so many children in that way was not easily achieved even by kings. Joseph did this so he could discover what concerned his father, and what had happened to him after Joseph's departure from him, and because he wanted to know what had become of his brother Benjamin. He was afraid that they had dared to commit the same wicked act against Benjamin that they had committed against him, and had taken him off also. We have not come here with any unjust purpose, nor in order to bring harm to the king's affairs. We only wish to be preserved, believing that your humanity might be a refuge for us from the miseries under which our country suffers. We have heard that you propose to sell corn, not only to your own countrymen, but also to strangers, and that you decided to allow the corn to preserve all who need it. That we are brothers and of the same common blood is plainly shown by the particular features of our faces, which are not very different from one another. Our father's name is Jacob, a Hebrew man, who had 12 of us as sons by 4 wives. While all 12 of us were alive, we were a happy family. But when one of our brothers, whose name was Joseph, died, our affairs changed for the worse. Our father could not stop making a long lamentation for him, and we are afflicted both by the calamity of our brother's death and by the miserable condition of our aged father. We have now come to buy corn, having entrusted the care of our father and the provision for our family to Benjamin, our youngest brother. If you send to our house, you may learn whether we are guilty of the least falsehood in what we say. In this way Reuben tried to persuade Joseph to think better of them. But when Joseph had learned from them that Jacob was alive, and that his brother had not been destroyed by them, he put them in prison for the present, intending to examine more into their affairs when he had leisure. On the 3rd day he brought them out, and told them that since they constantly affirmed they had not come to harm the king's affairs, and that they were brothers and sons of the father they had named, they would satisfy him of the truth of their words, if they left one of their company with him, who would suffer no injury there, and if after carrying corn to their father, they came back again and brought with them the brother they said they had left at home. Joseph said this would be accepted by him as assurance of the truth of what they had told him. At this they fell into greater grief than before. They wept and continually lamented among themselves over the calamity of Joseph, saying that they had fallen into this misery as a punishment from God for the evil plots they had made against him. Reuben reproached them at length for their repentance, which came too late and brought Joseph no benefit, and he earnestly urged them to bear patiently whatever they suffered, since it was being done by God as punishment on Joseph's account. They spoke this way to one another, not imagining that Joseph understood their language. A general sadness seized them at Reuben's words, along with repentance for what they had done, and they condemned the wickedness they had committed, for which they judged they were justly punished by God. When Joseph saw them in this distress, he was so moved that he began to weep. Unwilling for them to notice him, he withdrew. After a while he came to them again, took Simeon as a pledge for his brother's return, and told them to take the corn they had bought and go their way. He also privately commanded his steward to put the money they had brought to buy corn back into their sacks and send them away with it, and the steward did as he was commanded. When Jacob's sons came into the land of Canaan, they told their father what had happened to them in Egypt. They said they had been taken for spies against the king, and that although they said they were brothers, and had left their 11th brother with their father, they were not believed. They told him they had left Simeon with the governor until Benjamin should go there and serve as testimony to the truth of what they had said. They begged their father not to be afraid, but to send the lad with them. Jacob was not pleased with anything his sons had done. He took the detention of Simeon very hard, and because of it thought it foolish to give up Benjamin also. He did not yield to Reuben's persuasion, though Reuben begged him and gave permission that the grandfather might, in return, kill Reuben's own sons if any harm came to Benjamin on the journey. So they were distressed, and did not know what to do. Another accident troubled them still more, the money found hidden in their sacks of corn. Yet when the corn they had brought failed, and the famine still afflicted them, necessity forced them, and Jacob still had to resolve to send Benjamin with his brothers, because there was no returning to Egypt unless they came with what they had promised. As the misery grew worse every day, and his sons kept begging him, he had no other course to take in his present circumstances. Then Judas, who was bold by nature on other occasions, spoke his mind very freely to him. He said it did not become Jacob to be afraid for his son or to suspect the worst, as he did. Nothing could happen to his son except by the appointment of God, and whatever God appointed would certainly come to pass even if Benjamin stayed at home with him. Jacob ought not to condemn them to such obvious destruction, nor deprive them of the abundance of food they might have from Pharaoh, because of his unreasonable fear about Benjamin. Instead, he ought to care for the preservation of Simeon, so that by trying to stop Benjamin's journey he would not cause Simeon to perish. Judas urged him to trust God for Benjamin, and said that he would either bring Jacob's son back to him safely or lose his own life together with Benjamin's. At last Jacob was persuaded. He delivered Benjamin to them, with double the price of the corn, and also sent gifts to Joseph from the fruits of the land of Canaan, balsam and rosin, as well as turpentine and honey. Their father shed many tears when his sons departed, and they did the same. His concern was that he might receive them back safely after their journey. Their concern was that they might find their father well, and not afflicted with grief for them in any way. This lamentation lasted a whole day, until the old man was finally exhausted by grief and stayed behind. They went on their way to Egypt, trying to lessen their grief over their present misfortunes by hoping for better success afterward. As soon as they came into Egypt, they were brought down to Joseph. But no small fear disturbed them there, lest they should be accused about the price of the corn, as though they had cheated Joseph. They made a long apology to Joseph's steward and told him that when they came home, they found the money in their sacks, and that they had now brought it back with them. He said he did not know what they meant, and so they were freed from that fear. After he had released Simeon and dressed him in handsome clothing, he allowed him to be with his brothers. At that time Joseph came from his attendants on the king. They offered him their presents, and when he asked them about their father, they answered that they had found him well. When Joseph discovered that Benjamin was alive, he asked whether this was their younger brother, for he had seen him. They said that he was. Joseph replied that the God over all was his protector. But when his affection for Benjamin made him shed tears, he withdrew because he did not want his brothers to see him in that condition. Then Joseph took them to supper, and they were seated in the same order in which they used to sit at their father's table. Although Joseph treated them all kindly, he sent Benjamin a portion twice as large as the shares given to the rest of the guests. After supper, when they had settled themselves to sleep, Joseph commanded his steward to give them their measures of corn, and to hide its price again in their sacks. He also ordered him to put into Benjamin's sack the golden cup from which Joseph himself loved to drink. Joseph did this to test his brothers, to see whether they would stand by Benjamin when he was accused of stealing the cup and appeared to be in danger, or whether they would abandon him, and relying on their own innocence, go back to their father without him. When the servant had done as he was told, the sons of Jacob, knowing nothing about any of this, went on their way. They took Simeon with them and had a double reason for joy. They had received him back, and they were taking Benjamin back to their father as they had promised. But soon a troop of horsemen surrounded them, and Joseph's servant, who had put the cup into Benjamin's sack, came with them. This unexpected attack by the horsemen greatly disturbed them, and they asked why they had come upon men who only a little earlier had been considered worthy by their lord of an honorable and hospitable reception. The men answered by calling them wicked wretches, who had forgotten the very hospitable and kind treatment Joseph had given them, and who had not hesitated to injure him by carrying away the cup from which he had drunk to them in such a friendly manner. They said the brothers had valued neither their friendship with Joseph nor the danger they would be in if they were caught, compared with unjust gain. The servant then threatened that they would be punished. Though they had escaped the knowledge of someone who was only a servant, they had not escaped the knowledge of God, nor had they gotten away with what they had stolen. He asked why they were questioning the reason for his coming upon them as if they knew nothing of the matter, and told them they would immediately know it by their punishment. This and more of the same kind the servant said to reproach them. But they, knowing nothing at all that concerned them in this matter, laughed at what he said and wondered at the abusive language the servant used against them. He was bold enough to accuse men who had not even kept the price of their corn when it was found in their sacks, but had brought it back though no one else knew anything about it. Far from willingly doing Joseph any injury, they supposed that a search would justify them more surely than their own denial. They told him to search them, and if any one of them was guilty of the theft, to punish them all. Since they were conscious of no crime, they spoke with confidence, and as they thought, without any danger to themselves. The servants agreed that a search should be made, but said the punishment would fall only on the one found guilty of the theft. So they searched. After searching all the rest, they came last of all to Benjamin, knowing it was Benjamin's sack in which they had hidden the cup, while they had searched the others only to make a show of accuracy. The rest were now free from fear for themselves and were concerned only about Benjamin, while still fully assured that he too would be found innocent. They reproached those who had come after them for delaying them, since in the meantime they might have gone a good distance on their journey. But as soon as they searched Benjamin's sack, they found the cup and took it from him. Everything changed into mourning and lamentation. They tore their garments and wept over the punishment their brother would suffer for his theft, and over the delusion they had put upon their father when they promised to bring Benjamin safely back to him. What added to their misery was that the sad accident happened just when they thought they had escaped clearly. They confessed that this misfortune of their brother, and their father's grief over him, were owing to themselves, since they were the ones who had forced their father to send him with them when he was opposed to it. The horsemen took Benjamin and brought him to Joseph, with his brothers following him. When Joseph saw Benjamin in custody and the rest dressed like mourners, he asked how such vile wretches as they could have formed so strange an idea of his kindness to them, and of God's providence, that they would shamelessly act this way toward their benefactor, who had entertained them with such hospitality. At this, they offered themselves up to be punished in order to save Benjamin. They remembered the wicked enterprise they had once committed against Joseph. They declared that Joseph was happier than they were if he was dead, because he was free from the miseries of this life, and if he was alive, then he had the pleasure of seeing God's vengeance fall upon them. They said also that they were the plague of their father, since they would now add this new affliction over Benjamin to his former affliction over Joseph. Reuel also reproached them at length on this occasion. But Joseph dismissed their offer. He said they had committed no offense, and that he would be content with punishing the lad. It was not fitting, he said, to let Benjamin go free for the sake of those who had not offended, nor was it fitting to punish them together with the one who had been guilty of stealing. When Joseph promised to let the rest go away safely, they were thrown into great consternation, and could say nothing in this sad situation. But Judas, who had persuaded their father to send the lad away from him, and who was also a very bold and active man, determined to risk himself for the preservation of his brother. It is true, O governor, that we have been very wicked toward you, and on that account deserve punishment. All of us may justly be punished, though the theft was not committed by all, but only by one of us, and he the youngest. Yet there remains some hope for us, who otherwise must despair on his account, and that hope comes from your goodness, which promises us deliverance from our present danger. Now I beg you not to look at us, or at the great crime we have committed, but at your own excellent nature. Take counsel from your own virtue instead of from the anger you have against us. That passion is indulged by people of lower character, as they indulge their strength, not only on great occasions, but even on very trifling ones. Overcome that passion, sir, and do not be subdued by it. Do not let it kill those who do not presume upon their own safety, but desire to receive it from you. This will not be the first time you have bestowed safety on us. Before, when we came to buy corn, you gave us a great abundance of food and allowed us to carry home enough to our family to keep them from perishing by famine. There is no real difference between not overlooking men who were dying for lack of necessities, and not punishing those who seem to be offenders and have been so unfortunate as to lose the advantage of the glorious kindness they received from you. This will be an equal favor, though given in a different way. You will save by this act those whom you fed by the other, and by your own bounty you will preserve alive the souls you did not allow to be distressed by famine. It is indeed both wonderful and great to sustain our lives by corn, and to grant us the pardon by which, now that we are in distress, we may continue those lives. I am ready to suppose that God has been willing to give you this opportunity to show your virtuous disposition by bringing us into this calamity, so that it may appear that you can forgive injuries done to yourself, and that you may be regarded as kind to others besides those who need your assistance for other reasons. It is right to do good to those who are in distress for lack of food, but it is still more glorious to save those who deserve punishment for serious offenses against yourself. If it deserves praise to forgive people guilty of small offenses that cause a person's loss, and if the one who overlooks such offenses is praiseworthy, then to restrain one's passion in crimes that are capital to the guilty is to be like the most excellent nature of God himself. Truly, as for myself, if we did not have a father who showed at the death of Joseph how miserably he is always afflicted at the loss of his sons, I would not have said anything to save our own lives, except that it would be an excellent mark of your character to preserve even those who would have no one to lament them when they were dead. We would have yielded ourselves to suffer whatever you pleased. But now, though we do not plead for mercy for ourselves, and though, if we die, it will be while we are young and before we have enjoyed life, have regard for our father and pity his old age. It is on his account that we make these supplications to you. We beg you to grant us the lives that our wickedness has made liable to your punishment, for the sake of one who is not himself wicked, and whose being our father does not make us wicked. He is a good man, not worthy to have such trials of his patience. Now, while we are absent, he is afflicted with care for us. But if he hears of our deaths and the cause of them, he will die before his time. The reproachful manner of our ruin will hasten his end and kill him outright. Indeed, it will bring him to a miserable death, as he will hurry to rid himself of the world and bring himself into a state of insensibility before the sad story of our end spreads through the rest of the world. Consider these things in this way, even though our wickedness now provokes you with a just desire to punish it, and forgive it for our father's sake. Let your compassion for him weigh more with you than our wickedness. Have regard for the old age of our father, who, if we perish, will be very lonely while he lives and will soon die himself also. Grant this favor to the name of fathers, for by doing so you will honor the one who begat you and will grant it also to yourself, since you already bear the name of father. By that name you will be preserved by God, the Father of all, if by showing pious regard for our father you appear to honor him who is called by the same name. I mean, have pity on our father when you consider how miserable he will be if he is deprived of his sons. It is your part, therefore, to bestow on us what God has given us when it is in your power to take it away, and so to resemble him completely in charity. It is good to use power that can either give or take away on the side of mercy, and when you have the power to destroy, to forget that you ever had that power and to regard yourself as having power only for preservation. The more anyone extends this power, the greater reputation he gains for himself. By forgiving our brother for what he has unhappily committed, you will preserve us all. We cannot think of living if he is put to death, since we dare not show ourselves alive to our father without our brother. Here we must share the same catastrophe as his life. So far we beg you, O Governor, that if you condemn our brother to die, you will punish us together with him as partners in his crime. We will not think it reasonable to be kept alive only to kill ourselves from grief over our brother's death. Rather, let us die as equally guilty with him of this crime. I will leave you only this one consideration, and then say no more. Our brother committed this fault when he was young and not yet settled in wisdom of conduct, and men naturally forgive such young persons. I stop here without adding the rest of what I might say, so that if you condemn us, that omission may be thought to have hurt us, and to have allowed you to take the severer side. But if you set us free, let that be ascribed to your own goodness, of which you are inwardly conscious, that you free us from condemnation, not merely by preserving us, but by granting such favor as will make us appear more righteous than we really are, and by setting before yourself more reasons for our deliverance than we are able to produce ourselves. Therefore, if you resolve to kill him, I ask that you kill me in his place and send him back to his father. Or if you please to keep him with you as a slave, I am more fit to labor for your advantage in that condition, and as you see, I am better prepared for either of those sufferings. Judas, being very willing to undergo anything whatever for the deliverance of his brother, threw himself down at Joseph's feet and earnestly worked to soften and pacify his anger. All his brothers also fell down before Joseph, weeping and handing themselves over to destruction for the preservation of Benjamin's life. But Joseph, now overcome by his affections, and no longer able to play the part of an angry man, commanded everyone present to depart, so that he might make himself known to his brothers when they were alone. When the rest had gone out, he revealed himself to his brothers. I commend you for your virtue and for your kindness to our brother. I find you better men than I could have expected from what you once planned against me. Indeed, I did all this to test your love for your brother. So I believe that in what you did in my case you were not wicked by nature, but that everything has happened according to God's will, who by this has obtained for us the enjoyment of the good things we now have, and if he continues favorably disposed, of the good things we hope for hereafter. Since I now know, beyond expectation, that our father is safe and well, and since I see that you are so well disposed toward your brother, I will no longer remember the guilt you seem to have had concerning me. I will stop hating you for that wickedness, and instead, I give you thanks, because you have cooperated with God's intentions in bringing things to their present condition. I also want you to forget the same matter, since that imprudence of yours has come to such a happy conclusion, rather than be uneasy and blush over your offenses. Therefore do not let your evil intentions when you condemned me, nor the bitter remorse that might follow, be a grief to you now, since those intentions were frustrated. Go your way, rejoicing in what has happened by divine providence, and inform your father of it, so that he is not consumed with cares for you and deprives me of the most agreeable part of my happiness. I mean, lest he die before he comes into my sight and enjoys the good things we now have. Bring our father with you, and your wives and children, and all your kindred, and move your homes here. It is not proper that those dearest to me should live far from me now, that my affairs are so prosperous, especially when they must still endure 5 more years of famine. When Joseph had said this, he embraced his brothers, who were in tears and sorrow. But the generous kindness of their brother seemed to leave no room among them for fear that they would be punished for what they had plotted and done against him. They then feasted. As soon as the king heard that Joseph's brothers had come to him, he was exceedingly glad, as though it were part of his own good fortune. He gave them wagons filled with corn and gold and silver to be carried to Joseph's father. After they had received more from their brother, part to be carried to their father and part as free gifts to each of them, with Benjamin receiving still more than the rest, they departed. As soon as Jacob learned from his sons, when they returned home, what Joseph's condition was, he heard that Joseph had not only escaped death, for which Jacob had lived all along in mourning, but was living in splendor and happiness, ruling Egypt jointly with the king, and had almost all the king's affairs entrusted to his care. Jacob did not think anything he was told was unbelievable, because he considered the greatness of God's works and God's kindness to him, although the kindness had seemed interrupted for some time recently. So he immediately set out eagerly on the journey to Joseph. When Jacob came to the well of the oath Beer, Sheba, he offered sacrifice to God. He was afraid that the happiness found in Egypt might tempt his descendants to love it, settle there, and no longer think of moving into the land of Canaan and possessing it, as God had promised them. He was also afraid that if this descent into Egypt were made without God's will, his family might be destroyed there. In addition, he feared that he might die before seeing Joseph. With these doubts turning in his mind, he fell asleep. But God stood by him and called him twice by name. When Jacob asked who he was, God said that surely it was not right for Jacob to be unacquainted with the God who had always been a protector and helper to his forefathers, and after them, to Jacob himself. When Jacob's father would have deprived him of dominion, God gave it to him. By God's kindness, when Jacob was sent alone into Mesopotamia, he gained good wives and returned with many children and great wealth. His whole family had been preserved by God's providence, and it was God who had led Joseph, the son Jacob had given up as lost, into great prosperity. God had also made Joseph lord of Egypt, so that he differed little from a king. Therefore God had now come as Jacob's guide on this journey, and foretold that Jacob would die in Joseph's arms. God also told him that his descendants would spend many ages in authority and glory, and that he would settle them in the land he had promised them. Encouraged by this dream, Jacob continued more cheerfully toward Egypt with his sons, and all who belonged to them. In all, they numbered 70. I once thought it best not to set down the names of this family, especially because the Greeks find them difficult to pronounce. But on the whole, I think it necessary to mention the names, so I may disprove those who believe that we were not originally from Mesopotamia, but were Egyptians. Jacob had 12 sons, and Joseph had gone there before the rest. We will therefore set down the names of Jacob's children and grandchildren. Reuben had 4 sons, Anak, Phalu, Asaran, and Charmi. Simeon had 6, Jamuel, Jaminavad, Jachin, Sor, and Saul. Levi had 3 sons, Gershom, Koth, and Merari. Judas had 3 sons, Salah, Phares, and Zerah, and by Phares there were 2 grandchildren, Esrom and Amor. Issachar had 4 sons, Thola, Phuajah, Sab, and Semron. Zabulon had 3 sons with him, Sarad, Helen, and Jahlil. This far is the posterity of Leah, with whom went her daughter Dinah. These number 33. Rachel had 2 sons. One of them, Joseph, also had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. The other, Benjamin, had 10 sons, Bolel, Bakar, Asabel, Jiraz, Naaman, Jes, Rose, Mumphais, Aphais, and Arad. These 14, added to the 33 already listed, make 47. This was the legitimate posterity of Jacob. Besides these, by Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, he had Dan and Naphtali. Naphtali had 4 sons who followed him, Jessel, Guni, Isari, and Selium. Dan had 1 only, begotten son Uzi. If these are added to those already mentioned, they complete the number 54. Gad and Aser were the sons of Zilpah, who was Leah's handmaid. Gad had 7 with him, Saphaniah, Agiz, Sunis, Izabun, Aaron, Iraq, and Ariel. Aser had a daughter, Sarah, and 6 male children, whose names were Jomni, Isis, Isuis, Baris, Abar, and Melchiel. If these 16 are added to the 54, the previously mentioned number 70 is completed, Jacob himself not being included in that number. When Joseph learned that his father was coming, for his brother Judas had gone ahead and informed him of his approach, he went out to meet him, and they met at Hierapolis. Jacob almost fainted from this unexpected and great joy. Joseph revived him, though he himself was also deeply affected by the pleasure he now felt, yet he was not completely overcome by emotion as his father was. After this, Joseph asked Jacob to travel on slowly, while he himself took 5 of his brothers with him and hurried to the king to tell him that Jacob and his family had come. This was joyful news to Pharaoh. The king also told Joseph to tell him what kind of life his brothers preferred to lead, so that he could allow them to follow it. Joseph told him they were good shepherds and had been accustomed to no other occupation than this alone. By this he provided that they would not be separated, but would live in the same place and take care of their father. He also arranged that they might be acceptable to the Egyptians by doing nothing that would be common between them and the Egyptians, for the Egyptians are forbidden to meddle with feeding sheep. When Jacob came to the king, he greeted him and wished all prosperity to his government. Pharaoh asked how old he was. Jacob answered that he was 130 years old, and Pharaoh admired him because of the length of his life. When Jacob added that he still had not lived as long as his forefathers, Pharaoh gave him permission to live with his children in Heliopolis, for in that city the king's shepherds had their pasture. The famine, however, increased among the Egyptians, and this heavy judgment became more oppressive to them. The river did not overflow the ground, because it did not rise to its former height, and God did not send rain on it. Nor did the people make the least provision for themselves, so ignorant were they of what ought to be done. Joseph sold them corn for their money. When their money failed, they bought corn with their cattle and their slaves. If any of them had a small piece of land, they gave it up to buy food. By this means the king became owner of all their substance. They were moved, some to one place and some to another, so that possession of their country might be firmly secured to the king. The lands of the priests were the exception, for their country still remained in their own possession. This sore famine truly made their minds as well as their bodies slaves, and at last compelled them to obtain enough food by such dishonorable means. But when this misery ended, and the river overflowed the ground, and the ground produced its fruits plentifully, Joseph came to every city and gathered together the people belonging to it. He gave them back entirely the land which, by their own consent, the king could have possessed alone and alone enjoyed the fruits of. He also urged them to regard it as each person's own possession, and to return cheerfully to their farming. In return for the land, which the king restored to them when it was his own, they were to pay the king a tribute of the 5th part of the fruits. These men rejoiced at unexpectedly becoming owners of their lands again, and diligently observed what had been commanded them. By this means Joseph gained greater authority for himself among the Egyptians, and greater love for the king from them. This law, that they should pay the 5th part of their fruits as tribute, continued until their later kings. After Jacob had lived 17 years in Egypt, he fell ill and died in the presence of his sons. Before his death, he prayed that they would enjoy prosperity, and he prophetically foretold how each of them would dwell in the land of Canaan. This came to pass many years afterward. He also spoke at length in praise of Joseph, because Joseph had not remembered the evil deeds of his brothers to their harm. On the contrary, Joseph had been kind to them, giving them so many benefits that such things are rarely given even to a man's own benefactors. Jacob then commanded his own sons to admit Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, into their number, and to divide the land of Canaan in common with them. These matters will be treated later. However, Jacob made this request, that he might be buried at Hebron. So he died after living a full 150 years, lacking only 3. He had not fallen behind any of his ancestors in piety toward God, and he received such a reward for it as was fitting for people as good as they were. With the king's permission, Joseph carried his father's dead body to Hebron, and buried it there at great expense. At first his brothers were unwilling to return with him, because they feared that now their father was dead, Joseph might punish them for their secret practices against him. The one for whose sake Joseph had been so gracious to them was now gone. But Joseph persuaded them to fear no harm, and to hold no suspicions of him. So he brought them back with him, gave them great possessions, and never ceased his special care for them. Joseph also died, after living 110 years. He had been a man of admirable virtue, conducting all his affairs by the rules of reason and using his authority with moderation. This was the cause of his great happiness among the Egyptians, even though he had come from another country, and even though he had arrived in the miserable circumstances already described. At length Joseph's brothers also died, after living happily in Egypt. After some time, the descendants and sons of these men carried their bodies and buried them at Hebron. As for the bones of Joseph, they carried them into the land of Canaan later, when the Hebrews went out of Egypt, because Joseph had made them promise this to him by oath. What happened to each of these men, and by what labors they gained possession of the land of Canaan, will be shown later, after I have first explained why they left Egypt.
And we will halt there, with Joseph laid in his coffin in Egypt, and the family of Israel settled and growing in the rich land of Goshen, honored guests in a foreign kingdom. But honored guests can become slaves when the rulers who knew them are gone, and the children of a free people can be born into chains. Next time, in part 3, a new king who never knew Joseph, the long bondage of the Hebrews, and the river cradle of the child who will set them free. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.